Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the bi-monthly online public affairs program. We go beyond the headlines and sound bites and talk about all the big issues facing Hoosiers across the great state of Indiana. I'm Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today on Indiana Issues, Joe Donnelly meets with Brett Kavanaugh, also some new polling in the U.S. Senate race, and some other big interesting items with school getting underway here in the state of Indiana. And our guest today, we gave all our political class guys the day off and asked our pundit friends to come on in. Just let everybody know the media is not the enemy. Joining us is our good friend Eric Berman, political reporter at WIBC Radio Network Indiana. Eric, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Beth Schneider, former statehouse reporter for the Indy Star. Beth, thank you.
Thank you.
And Adam Wren, writer for Importantville, Politico, and all other great things. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly meets with SCOTUS nominee Brett Kavanaugh this week. Joe Donnelly called the meeting, I want to say, productive and wide-ranging. They talked judicial philosophy, working in the Bush administration, and also his time as a judge. Lots of questions as to what Joe Donnelly will do. Adam, you have a lot of contacts out in the D.C. universe. What are you hearing?
You know, I think that what we're seeing is Donnelly basically doing what he always does, which is to study an issue, figure out a way forward. What's interested me most about coverage of his meeting with Kavanaugh on Wednesday is that it's sort of framed around the idea that he's still undecided, as if the hearings are an afterthought that we still have to go through. So. I think he'll consider it carefully, and he's certainly getting attacked. I'm skeptical that if he votes for Kavanaugh's confirmation, that it will have as big of an impact. I still think his voters are going to go to the polls on Election Day.
On their screen there is some of the footage that was released by U.S. Senator Joe Donnelly's office with his meeting with Kavanaugh. Beth, Joe Donnelly's come under some fire for that video, people saying that he's using it for campaign footage, and there was no audio, and they said no cameras. Is that just noise, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's noise. I don't think anybody cares whether there's video of him. You frequently see video of a judicial nominee meeting with the senator just to prove that they actually met. And so I don't think that's a big deal. I also don't think I can't believe Republicans were actually complaining that it took him too long to meet with Kavanaugh. Again, he met with him.
Only the second Democrat to do so.
Yes, and Republican senators from Indiana, in fact, from most of the nation, did not meet with Merrick Garland. So I don't think that the timing of when he meets is going to make a difference. I don't think that making a decision on whether you're supporting him before the hearings are even held is going to make a difference. I do think the vote will make a difference on the margins for some people. I have seen I've never understood zealots, but I've got a lot of them on Twitter.
No.
Who will either, if he doesn't vote for him, the man's dead to him. If he does vote for him, they're never going to vote for him again. I think some of them will, when push comes to shove, go to their base. If you're a Republican, you're going to vote Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're going to vote Democrat, and it'll still depend on how many people come out. But I think there will always be a few, and Donnelly is always in danger of that. If he's too far to the right, he will lose some of that far left.
Eric, let me get your chime in here, because what are the consequences, do you think, of a yes or no vote for Joe Donnelly?
I think they're minimal, and I know we're going to talk about the polling numbers out there, which suggest something more than minimal. And color me skeptical. I agree with Adam and Mary Beth. I mean, there is going to be some movement on the margins, just like there were people who voted for Jill Stein rather than vote for Hillary Clinton. There's going to be some people who say, no, you did not stand up and resist. And on the Republican side, how much goodwill does Joe Donnelly gain if he votes for Brett Kavanaugh? How many people are saying, well, okay, he's a Democrat, but he voted for Kavanaugh, we'll give him this one? This race is going to be decided on other things. If he votes no, it's definitely going to be a campaign ad against him. If he votes yes, then there's going to be some alienation on the margins. But I have a hard time picturing it moving large numbers of votes.
And Adam, this was what I was going to ask you about Joe Donnelly and Brett Kavanaugh. Like Eric, we'll get to the poll numbers in just a second. Does a yes vote just merely mitigate the people from getting really worked up and the peasants coming with torches and pitchforks? I guess would be.
I agree with Eric and Mary Beth. The way that I see this is we have succumbed often as talking heads or journalists to this idea that the race is going to be all about one particular thing. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when this race was going to be a referendum on tax reform. And
That was just last year.
yeah. So, I mean, it's not so easy to distill an entire Senate race down to one vote. In this case, I just don't see that happening.
Look, the fact that Joe Donnelly did vote for Neil Gorsuch, as a justice for the Supreme Court, I'm trying to get hopefully next few days some data on Donnelly's votes on all of the nominees that Donald Trump has pushed so far. Mary Beth, can Joe Donnelly, vote yes, and that'll keep maybe some of the more zealot people at bay? Or do you think, or does it really matter?
He can vote yes, but it will hurt him with the real zealots on the left. There are people out there who are already there. He's got an ad, his own ad, where he's out there talking about how I voted for the wall. I have seen over and over people saying how much they hate that ad that makes them reconsider supporting Donnelly. What's the point of having a Democrat if they're going to be supporting Donald Trump on something like the wall? And so I think he does have to worry, I think, more about the left than he does about the right.
Turn back the clock 2 years to 2016. You had a lot of Republicans as late as September saying, I can't vote for Donald Trump, I'm voting for Gary Johnson, or I'm going to stay home or something. And with Mike Pence leading the way, the Republicans came home in October. That's how Donald Trump won. All that libertarian vote that was showing up in polls dissipated to next to nothing. Something similar, I would assume, is going to happen on the Democratic side. There's a lot of people who may say, I can't vote for Joe Donnelly. What good are you anyway? At the end of the day, when the DSCC is in saying,
Democratic Senatorial Campaign.
When the Democratic campaign arms of various types, not just the DSCC, but Joe Donnelly's campaign and the other super PACs, when they come in and say you need a Democrat with President Trump in the White House, you need somebody to serve as a check on that, it's hard to picture, again, all but the most committed few, and there will be fewer of those committed zealots than perhaps in 2016. It's hard to imagine that people don't come home to the party. I still expect this to be negligible.
Our guests today on our political panel are Eric Berman, WIBC Radio Network Indiana, Mary Beth Schneider, former statehouse reporter for the Indianapolis Star, and Adam Wren of Importantville. Got our political pundits with us in studio today, and analysts as we're talking about the big issues of the day. Speaking of the U.S. Senate, polling numbers, and everybody loves poll numbers because they gives us something to talk about when there's really no other news.
Well, we love them because they've been scarce.
Oh, well, that too. Hopefully I'm trying to change that for October. Well, there's a new poll out in the U.S. Senate race giving Joe Donnelly, believe it or not, a 12-point lead over Republican Mike Braun. But
believe
ironically,
it not.
Yeah, but that number changes. As you look up there on our screen, Donnelly nearly 51%, Mike Braun just under 39%, and 10% of the voters undecided. But here's where it gets interesting. When we talk about a vote for Brett Kavanaugh, if Donnelly votes for Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court, his numbers drop to just slightly more than 39%. Mike Braun stays about the same, and the undecideds go to 16%. Now, if Donnelly votes against Kavanaugh, it feels like a test on the SAT, he goes to 45%, Mike Braun 38%, undecided 22%. And by the way, this poll was done by the Trafalgar Group, their Republican-leaning pollster. They were sort of given a C as far as pollsters go, but they surveyed about 1,400 likely voters and had a margin of error of about 3%. Eric, let me start with you. What does that poll tell you apart from it makes for a really interesting LSAT question?
Well, I mean, if it's accurate, it's very bad news, not just for Mike Braun, but for the entire Republican ticket, for House candidates, for state House candidates. A 12-point lead for Joe Donnelly, if true, that's very good news for Democrats. I'm really skeptical. Again, it's a C-rated polling outfit. They're still included in the 538 average, but they're not at the top of the list. 12-point just doesn't pass the smell test. If another poll comes out and shows something similar, that's the point where if I'm at Republican headquarters or Mike Braun headquarters, I'm pushing the panic button. But one poll, this looks an awful lot like an outlier. The other thing that I find fascinating about this is they're not interested in the Senate race so much as they're interested in the Kavanaugh nomination. And those are some interesting numbers. Again, those we're all in agreement. Again, you get some more numbers out there that show the numbers really move that much, but you lose 12 points if you vote against Kavanaugh, or vote for Kavanaugh. That's striking. And then one last thing to throw in, that you don't have Lucy Brenton in this poll. And
she's in the undecideds.
Well, yeah, she is in the undecideds. But what that means is, if this is an accurate poll, it's even worse news for Mike Braun than it looks like, because Lucy Brenton is going to get her 5%. There's very little that's going to affect that. So his pool of undecideds is not 10% or even 22% in the biggest one. It's 5 or 17. There's fewer voters to draw on than that would indicate.
What does that tell you, Mary Beth? You cover politics a long time, seen a lot of polls. Is this just an outlier, or is it like Eric said, this is more about the impact of the Kavanaugh nomination than the actual U.S. Senate race?
Now, whenever you have a poll that is markedly different from what you have seen before, and the earlier polls had Donnelly slightly down, you want to have at least one other, maybe two other polls to confirm it. So right now I think it's an outlier. There were a couple odd things about the poll that just didn't jive with me. He loses votes if he votes for Kavanaugh, but when you looked at the demographics, it was a high number of people over age 62 who should be more leaning Republican and more inclined to be for somebody who voted for Kavanaugh. That just struck me as just a little off balance. I'm not sure what to make of that. I also think that the wording might have confused people. And so, again, I'd like to see another poll before you say, oh, my gosh, Donnelly's coasting, because I just don't buy it.
Adam, the Trafalgar Group, I was doing some research, because when I saw the poll information, I was like, what, huh? I had to make sure I wasn't, in Denver, Colorado on a vacation when I was trying to figure all this stuff out here. They've done a lot of Republican pollsters. They polled the Georgia special election. I want to say they polled Kansas. I want to say Utah. So it's a Republican firm, but,
Yeah.
Does that give them more street cred, or your thoughts?
I mean, on the face of it, you would think so, that they would be more accurate in polling a red state like Indiana. I would not be surprised if this poll picked up on some movement that was happening in the electorate. I do think it's an outlier, but I would not be surprised to see another poll that has Donnelly 5 or 6 points ahead of Braun at this point. Braun told Politico earlier this week that he's spending 80% of his time just collecting his resources, which to me fits the true definition of a political gaffe, and that you say something that's true, but that you shouldn't say. And I just do not see him on the trail. He's not holding press conferences. It just feels like he's been in some ways absent from this race. He's trailing Donnelly with cash on hand. Donnelly has $5 million. So I think this poll might be picking something up, a movement that's happening, but I do think it's just too wide of a margin to pass the smell test at this point.
Yeah,
I've noticed what you're saying about him not being out,
Yeah.
and the ads are markedly different during the primary. The primary ads were personable and kind of funny. They were hard-hitting if you're Messer and Rokita, but they were enjoyable.
Right.
Now the only thing that's up on the air are extremely negative against Donnelly, and I'm not sure that is working for him.
What's interesting to me about the way he's running as the general election is the blue shirt, the thing that got him to be different in the Republican primary could ultimately be the thing that throws him off. I mean, he just seems like another guy in a blue shirt.
let me ask you this, Eric, and it kind of piggybacks on something that Adam had just said. I mean, early on when we're going through all the motions of 2016, we were hearing stories about Donald Trump winning Indiana by 20 points and change. We looked at our friends who were working on the Trump campaign and said, "You guys, we love you, but you're kind of nuts." Nobody believed it. Could we see that also, happening here, that this is such a weird political season that the outliers are actually, the prophets?
It's very possible. And, one thing that gives Trafalgar Group some credibility is precisely the fact that they are a Republican polling outfit. For a Republican poll to say Mike Braun is up 12 points, it would be easy to dismiss. For a Republican outfit to say that Braun is down 12, that sort of makes you sit up and take notice. The other thing that's interesting, this poll also polled on Donald Trump. They show Donald Trump with a 50-46 disapproval rating in Indiana. They've got him underwater, which is the first poll I've seen saying that. If, in fact, that's true, and the proportions seem about right, if Trump is down 4, then it would make sense for Braun to be down another 8 because Donnelly has a lot of goodwill built up. If Trump is down 4, that's trouble, again, not just for Mike Braun, but for Trey Hollingsworth, for Jackie Walorski, for lots of other people.
We are watching Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program, where we talk about the big issues of the day, coming to you from Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Our guests today are Eric Berman of WIBC Radio Network Indiana, Beth Schneider, former Star reporter, and Adam Wren of Importantville. Another news item that has actually started here in Indianapolis, where we are, but has just spread nationwide, has been the situation involving Roncalli High School, putting a teacher who's a lesbian in same-sex marriage on administrative leave. That has just garnered national headlines across the place. Indiana lawmakers, State Representative Dan Forstall, submitting language to the legislature that would deny sort of public funding for schools that discriminate on these grounds. The school saying, no, our rules are just quite simple. She signed a contract to go along with the teaching of the church. She's in a relationship that goes contrary. Mary Beth, let me start with you as someone who's covered local government. Where do you see all this going?
I don't think the legislature will change it at all. I don't think Forrestal will get a hearing, much less a bill passed. I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic grade school, Catholic high school, and I come from a low-income family. I didn't actually know I came from a low-income family until I filled out college financial aid form, and someone gave it back to me saying nobody's family makes this little at this school. I was mortified, we went to Catholic school because my dad was so strongly Catholic, but also we afforded it by us working there. I have always been troubled by vouchers for parochial schools because I do think state tax dollars should go to public schools. And if you want to make that choice, you do it. My parents did. They had us cleaning the rooms and working in the cafeteria and that kind of thing in order to cover the tuition. But if you frankly, I think if you take state tax dollars, you should have to follow the same rules as everybody else. But that is not what the legislature passed. That is not the deal they made with the parents who now send their kids to these schools. And so I don't think the state has any really easy route to be complaining now.
Eric, this is just one of those things that lots of folks will make noise about it and it'll get a lot of attention, but at the end of the day, the legislation may be introduced, but that will probably be all that happens. It only gets introduced. In
a Republican majority, and no one, including the Democrats that I've talked to, expects that to change. Supermajority maybe, but the Republicans are still going to have a majority. There's no way this gets a hearing, that this is going to stay in place. The thing that I've found remarkable, I've had 2 separate people come up to me since all this broke saying, what's Dan Forrestal doing? Would the Democrats really try and tear down the voucher program? It's amazing to me that the voucher program is so ingrained after, 10, 15 years, because the Democrats have opposed the voucher program throughout. This has always been something that was in part for this reason. And so this should not come as a surprise, but people have gotten accustomed to it being there.
And let me ask you from a national perspective, because once again, it's a story from a high school in the south side of Minneapolis that just garnered so much national attention. Has this reignited the debate and discussion about not only vouchers, but also religious freedom, religious liberty, and the equality in the LGBT community?
I don't think as a national group of people right now following the news that we're capable of being interested in anything that isn't Donald Trump related. I'm sure
the president will chime in sometime.
What struck me about this story is just how poorly, regardless of what you think about vouchers, just how poorly the school has managed the public perception of this, the public rollout. The very first tweet that we saw in this story was a security guard, a police officer, stopping an Indianapolis Star reporter from even getting into the parking lot to report the story. They have taken down different website properties, and they've just really poorly communicated about their decision, regardless of what you think of their decision. They've told that story in a really poor way.
Yeah,
and that's something, Mary Beth, that is just from my media PR days, I have never seen anything handled as badly as this one, whether it has just been having the taking down of social media and not being able to handle this matter. And I understand it's an employment issue and a personal issue, but at the very least just handling it very quietly and discreetly so this doesn't become the big blow up that's now, soon be on the front page of the New York Times.
Well, it had already blown up, I think, before they had a chance to do that, because it escalated on their own Facebook page, because as the word spread to the school, a lot of parents who really liked this person, a lot of students who looked to this person as a mentor, were very upset. And so what they should have done is come open then and maybe said, let's explain. We just feel very strongly that this is our policy. But they're almost in a box because this came out at the same time as renewed focus on Catholic priests and pedophilia. And so there were people who went decades in churches abusing children. And they're firing a woman for being married to someone she loves. She hasn't hurt anybody. So the public perception of the Catholic Church, and I say this as somebody again who, raised Catholic, it's heartbreaking, frankly. Yeah.
Eric, as we all know, they'll say in politics, perception is everything. I mean, you want to talk about worst time. On the one hand, this very beloved teacher who's been there for 15 years. I had a conversation with a good friend of mine whose son was going through some really dark times. That counselor sort of pulled him off the ledge. Otherwise, he may not be with us here today. On the one hand, we have that narrative, juxtaposed with what we're seeing coming out of Philadelphia, out of the state of Pennsylvania. It just kind of makes you wonder, who's doing the crisis management over here?
Yeah, the timing is dreadful. Mary Beth's right. Having this come up at the same time as the horrors coming out of Pennsylvania, that doesn't help any, regardless of how good the messaging is. But the messaging has not been great. I mean, there's one position, and it's not going to be a popular position for Roncalli to take, but the position is what they're doing in the first place. Look, this is church doctrine. This is not a mystery to anybody. We love her too, but we're a Catholic school. This isn't Hobby Lobby. This isn't a pizza place. This is a church-run school. It shouldn't come as a surprise that they're enforcing doctrine. We've seen that at Notre Dame and other places. But they waited 4 years to do it. The messaging on even that point has been mysterious.
Yeah, because that's something I've been trying to figure out. It's like, okay, this person has been at the school for 15 years. She's been with her partner for 22 years.
She's been married to her partner for 4 years.
Married 4 years. It's not like somebody didn't see something somewhere. And does this, Adam Wren, when we now get to these sort of religious liberty, religious freedom cases in an employment universe, if this is going to be the new standard, are we now about to open ourselves a universe? Well, okay, I'm going to sue. I may lose, but everybody's sins are now going to be made public because I'm going to go through everybody who works here.
Well,
have
that's
these people,
just it.
Yeah.
Are they holding the same standard to everybody else? It's also against church doctrine to get divorced. Do they have divorced people on staff? There's all kinds of issues that this will bring up.
Wait, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there is a larger conversation to be had as a nation at the intersection between faith and the public square, and I don't think that we are capable of having that as a nation, as sad it is to say, in a thoughtful, articulate way.
We got about 5 minutes left. We're to wrap our program. I want to make sure we hit up school safety. Governor Eric Holcomb in the past week or so sent out recommendations on school security, more mental health, safety equipment and training. Also require active shooting drills in schools. Eric, how much of this is going to happen? Will it all make a difference?
Something's going to happen. How much of a difference it's going to make? We're dealing with outlier events to begin with. We just had one in Noblesville a couple of months ago. That's the first one in Indiana in a few years, and even the ones before that are not what we think of as school shootings. It was somebody who went in with a gun looking for one person. So how much of a difference does it make if you go from 1 to 0? That's the law of small numbers. I do think that it's going to happen. What the governor has already implemented, office holders like to talk about common sense solutions. These are common sense steps. The bigger steps outlined in the report, we'll see how much they want to do and how much of that we can afford.
Mary Beth, is the model for school safety in suburban and rural school districts going to be urban schools? Because I jokingly say, and sort of tongue-in-cheek, we've had to deal with this stuff for a lot longer than our suburban friends have.
But you've also had rural schools impacted. Look at that school down in Texas in that little community. And yet they had a terrible shooting there. There was one in a church down there. I think the bigger wonder isn't that they're going to do these steps now. It's that how many years has it been since Columbine? How long has it taken them to put in? I mean, do they really have to tell people you need to have drills now? Really? Do you that kind of blew my mind. I understand. Some of the problems with getting some more resource officers in there and possibly arming certain individuals in the school, that kind of thing. But you would have thought drills was a no-brainer.
Adam, what does this do as part of the national debate on school safety?
From my perspective, this has been a really positive step forward, an example of how someone like Governor Eric Holcomb seems to have really led and thoughtfully carried out a policy from beginning to end. And I think really the way that we've responded to this shooting attack is an example of how, as dysfunctional as our federal government is, as the antithesis of that is how functional our state government is. Most bills and resolutions are passed on a bipartisan basis here in Indiana. And I think this is something to be proud of and happy.
Eric, is this going to be one of those things that's going to get caught up in legislative politics? I've already started seeing some emails start to pop up in my email box from some of the statehouse Democrats.
It might get caught up in fiscal politics. We don't have the revenue forecast yet. Tim Brown and Ryan Mishler will decide how much of this we can afford. The report from this task force explicitly said we're not going anywhere near gun laws. The legislature is not going to go anywhere near gun laws. That's going to be what the Democrats will say should be in there, and much as we said with the voucher bill, it's going to sink without a trace. But I think that the broader issue, once the gun amendments are disposed of, they'll pass something, and probably by overwhelming margins.
Now we get to as we get near the end of our program, we got to do our political predictions and prognostications, what we're paying attention to, what we're keeping an eye on. Eric, we'll start with you.
I'm back to that 50-46 disapproval rating for Donald Trump. I am going to be watching to see if anything backs that up, and if it does, how big is the wave going to be? Because that's about the worst news that Republicans could get for this election.
Mary Beth?
Pretty much ditto. I was covering politics when the 94 wave came through that swept Republicans into power all across the country, and you really did not see it coming until about October. And that was huge. Now, I think gerrymandering and the nature of states will temper this. I don't think Democrats can do nearly as well as Republicans did back then. But the fact that you're seeing a number like that for Trump in Indiana now from a Republican polling firm, again, I'm still skeptical of this poll, but maybe you're seeing the wave sooner.
Adam?
I think the next national poll that we see come out is going to have Donnelly ahead.
And my prediction is there's a hearing taking place this afternoon as we're recording this, as we're having this conversation about libertarians trying to remove Connie Lawson from the ballot by the election board. My prediction is that Connie Lawson will stay on the ballot.
Absolutely.
Considering
Absolutely.
they've already ruled on that, I think that's a safe prediction.
Hey, like
She should.
Any good lawyer, always bet on the right horse. Our guests today have been Eric Berman, 93 WIBC Radio and Network Indiana, former Indianapolis Star reporter Mary Beth Schneider, and Adam Wren of Importantville. Thank you all very much for being with us. We appreciate it. And thank you for joining us. Also, thanks to the great folks here at Edge Media Studios here in downtown Indianapolis for providing us with the production facilities today. You've been watching Indiana Issues. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Thank you for being with us, and we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.